Hi, this is Ben Archibald at Deep South Outfitters in Birmingham, Alabama. Today we're going to be going over the Clouser Minnow, which is just kind of a general all-purpose minnow imitation. It's a good pattern because you can use it in fresh and salt water. It's easy to tie, so if you're a beginner and you're just getting into tying kind of more predator style flies, it's something easy. It doesn't take a lot of materials. But it's a very versatile platform. I've caught fish in fresh and salt water with it. There's a lot of room for introducing, different flashes, different colors, different eyes, different weights. You can use a freshwater hook like I have in the vise right here, or you can use a nickel-plated saltwater hook and go after some either redfish, speckled trout, kind of anything in salt water. So it's a good all-around pattern, easy to tie, good readily available materials, and so it's a good fly. So let's go ahead and get started. So we've got Veevus 100 Denier gel spun is the thread I'm using today. You can use pretty much any thread you want. I would recommend at least a 140 in flat waxed if you're using flat waxed, and in terms of gel spun, 100's plenty. Gel spun doesn't really have a tendency to break, but I would recommend having a slightly bigger thread just so you're not breaking your thread so much, because we are going to be doing some bucktail work, and you're going to want the pulling power to make sure that you get that bucktail nice and secured. In terms of hooks, today we're tying on a B10S Gamakatsu size 4. This is going to be kind of more of a freshwater version of this pattern. Pretty general purpose in terms of spotted bass and largemouth, but you can use some of the Gamakatsu saltwater hooks if you want to go after some stuff in the surf, and you can definitely take some liberties in terms of hook choice. As long as you have eyes that are heavy enough to flip the hook over, you'll be fine. So let's go ahead and get started tying. So I'm going to go ahead and start my thread pretty much right at the eye of the hook, and take a few wraps back to make sure my thread is secured. As I said, we're tying with a gel spun today, so really make sure that you have that thread nice and secured to the hook itself, and make sure you have a nice little thread base. Next, we're going to tie on the actual weight to the pattern in the eyes. I have some Hareline double pupil brass eyes in size medium, in black and chartreuse. You can you can definitely use plenty of different eyes. Again, as long as the eyes are heavy enough to flip the hook over, you're good. Any of the Hareline eyes, any of the Wapsi eyes that have weight, you should be fine. So make sure that you have a nice thread base to tie your eyes onto. You don't want to be tying them to bare hook shank. One of the biggest issues you're going to face in this problem is having your eyes want to rotate. And so make sure you're tying them onto the actual thread base. So I'm going to take them and place them on the thread, and then take a few nice tight wraps over the top, and then I'm going to rotate these eyes and go the opposite direction, and get these eyes secured on top of the hook and in the orientation I want them. And all I'm going to do is just take some X wraps to make sure that these are in the orientation that I want them and they're secured to the eye of the hook. As you can see, I kind of tied them back about 3, maybe 3.5 eye lengths behind the eye of the hook. You're going to want to leave, plenty of room to make sure that you can tie in a stack of bucktail up front, and you're not going to be, crowding the hook eye. So those eyes are kind of where I want them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few nice good wraps around the base, and then I'm going to hold my vise, and I'm really going to pull on those and really make sure those wraps that I put over the top, those X wraps, are nice and tight and are holding those eyes in place. So now that we got that all set, I'm actually going to take an extra step and put some super glue on the bottom of the hook, just to make sure that these eyes don't turn around, and just to make sure this fly remains durable. Because if you tie this fly right, you should be able to catch numerous fish on it without having any issue. And so I'm just going to take, this is a brush on Loctite, and just take the bottom part of that and glue those eyes to the hook. Alright, so we're going to take a break from the actual tying and kind of go over some basics in terms of the material we're working with. So today we're working with Bucktail, so this is kind of your standard northern Bucktail that you can get from Hareline or Wapsi or kind of anyone. So if you take a look at this Bucktail, as you can see, you've got a fairly significant difference in fibers. These fibers down here are more hollow. So they tend to flare a lot more, and this kind of goes for all bucktails. These fibers, you know, toward the base, they're going to want to flare more than the ones at the tip. They have a lot more trapped air, they're hollower, and so when you tie them on, they're going to want to spin and they're going to want to flare. As you move up, you kind of get a decreased flare. As you get kind of toward the middle, it doesn't really flare as much, and then when you get to the tip, these fibers are very solid, so they tie in straight. So we're going to want to be at least the halfway point up. You know, closer to the tip, the better, because this fly is a very kind of thin minnow impersonation. You know, we want a smaller, thinner profile, sparser profile, and so we're going to stick to the tip fibers for this fly. And so make sure that when you're cutting off your bucktail, you're selecting fibers closer to the tip that are nice and solid and aren't going to want to flare on you. Alright, now that our super glue is dried, we're just going to kind of get back into tying this fly. So as I just said, make sure that we're getting some good tip hair, and you definitely don't need as much bucktail as you think. So this fly is going to ride hook point up, and this is going to be a chartreuse and white fly, so we're going to tie in our white first on the top part of the hook, considering that this whole fly is going to turn upside down. So we're going to take our white bucktail, again, fibers closer to the tip, to make sure that they're not flaring. I would say, at most in terms of bucktail, I would get, a quarter of a pencil in terms of diameter. You really do not need a lot of bucktail to make this fly work. In fact, if you tie it, you just need enough to make sure you have the profile, but kind of the sparser you tie it, the more that bucktail is going to be able to swim and get the action that you want. So definitely don't tie too much of this in. And so now that I've got my bucktail right here, I'm going to take it and I'm going to grab it close to the tips and pull out all of this fuzzy underfur and all of your shorter fibers that you do not need for this fly, and make sure that that's all nice and clean. Then I'm going to take it and tie it in. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to pinch it in my right hand. First measure it out. I like to go to around here. I like my fly to be about 2.5, 3 inches. You can tie it in kind of the length that you want. I'm going to take it and I'm going to pinch this clump of bucktail, and then I'm going to hold it and pinch the hook shank as well. Then I'm going to take my thread and make one nice tight wrap, make another, and then just slowly walk back making tight wraps to kind of where that hook starts to bend on this hook in particular. Then I'm going to walk right straight back up forward with, again, these nice touching tight wraps, just to make sure that this bucktail is going to be nice and secure. Then we're going to take our thread and we're going to jump it below the eyes so it's right up in front, and we're going to take the rest of these bucktail butts and we're going to tie them down in front of these eyes as well. And again, same thing, pinch it down to the hook shank and make sure you're making nice tight wraps up in front. The tighter you make these wraps and the more secure your thread pressure is, the more durable this fly is going to be. It doesn't really make a difference on maybe the first or second fish, but especially if you're fishing in saltwater or you're having a good numbers day, if you do not use the correct thread technique, your fly is going to fall apart and you're going to have to go to another fly. So now that we have this nice and secured up front, as you can see, we got all these bucktail butts. and we do not want to crowd that hook eye. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this up, we're going to take our scissors, and we're going to cut it at an angle. And so we have this nice little ramp. And if it does not look good on the first cut, you can go in, especially if you have a fine tip scissor, and make sure that that tapers down how you like it. Might not matter to the fish, but it probably matters to you. We all like having nice, clean, tidy flies. So then we're going to wrap down all the way to the hook shank, cover that all of our work up, make sure that this is nice and secure. And then we're going to get working on our top color. As I said, this is going to be a chartreuse over white, so I'm going to go ahead and tie in my chartreuse. Again, taking some nice tip hair, so it doesn't flare, it doesn't get this big bulky profile. We want to keep this nice and slim. So I'm going to take the same thing. I'm going to take my clump. Again, you know, probably use less than you think you should. Take it, grab it close to the tips, and clean out all of those smaller fibers, those shorter fibers, and that fuzzy under fur. Now we're going to take the same thing, and I'm actually going to take a little bit out of this clump. This is probably the hardest step of this fly, and this is probably where I see most of the mistakes being made in terms of tying this fly. So we're actually just going to be tying this clump in front of the eyes itself. So, you know, I see a lot of people having issues with this fly, either having this top clump pull out, or tying in this clump too bulky and rushing the hook eye and having, you know, an unclean hook eye, which just makes for trouble in terms of, you know, threading line onto it and making sure that you can actually tie this fly on. So how you avoid that is, number one, control the amount of material. Don't put too much material onto this fly. And then two, you know, manage your space and manage, you know, how efficient your thread wraps are in terms of securing the material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this clump, I'm going to measure it out, make sure it is nice and even with that white bucktail I tied in, and then right in front of those eyes I'm going to take one nice wrap and then really start to tighten down. Make sure that clump doesn't rotate on you, but really tighten down, and make sure that clump of bucktail is really secure. And this is the best way that I've found in terms of tying durability into this fly. So you have all these bucktail butts. Before you cut them off, one of the best ways to ensure that these bucktail butts don't pull out and this top clump doesn't pull out on you is what I do is I take little portions of it. So you see, I just took a little portion of that, folded it back, put a couple of wraps in front of it. See, now it's standing straight up. I'm bending it at a 90-degree angle and making sure that it is harder for that bucktail to pull out. So I made a couple of wraps on that one. Then I'm going to go forward, take another little bit of these bucktail butts, and I'm going to tie those back the same exact way. Then I'm going to take a few more, and I'm just going to gradually work forward, tying these bucktail butts straight up until I get to the hook eye and until I run out of bucktail that I have to secure. So now that I'm at the hook eye, as you can see, all this bucktail is standing straight up or maybe even facing back a little bit. That's what we want. We want to make sure that these bucktail butts are nice and secured. So now I'm going to go in and actually trim them, and this is going to take some, you know, it takes some pretty intricate cutting here. You're going to make sure that you cut those as clean and as close to that thread as you possibly can. And again, this is another one of those things where you can make that original cut and then go back in and kind of revise it with your scissors, especially if you have kind of a micro tip scissor. And then you're going to just go back through and clean that up. And it'll get a little more cleaned up with the next step that we're going to be throwing in. And so I'm going to tie in some flash into this fly. You can use numerous different kinds of flash, the most classic being crystal flash. You can use flash boo, you can use, here I've got, another kind of interesting idea. You can use this, ripple ice fiber. This is the electric stuff. It's got kind of a matte finish to it. But I'm going to use, in this instance, I'm going to use some of this, some PolarFlash, which is this stuff right here. I'm going to use just a couple fibers of this on either side. This is another kind of instance where, it doesn't take a lot to get the desired effect. We're not looking to make this, flashy like a Rolex, that the Creolex or Rolex pattern. We're not looking to make it that flashy. We're just looking for just a little bit of accent flash, because a lot of the bait fish that this is designed to imitate have a little bit of reflective value just in how they look. So I'm going to go ahead and take, this is about 3 to 4 strands. This is a finer flash. I would recommend taking 2 or 3 if you're using crystal flash. Again, it does not take a lot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this first clump and I'm going to tie it in on the near side to me. I'm going to place it where I want it and take a couple of tight wraps. Again, positioning it where I want this material. And making sure that I tie it in with some nice tight thread wraps. And then I'm going to take this, tie it forward, make sure it's all nice and secure, and then I'm going to fold it back onto the other side. So we're going to take this and fold this over to the other side. And at this point, you can kind of take it and work with it a little bit and kind of spread it out into the actual thing. You can either take your thumbnail, or in instances like this where I'm tying in such a little amount of it, I usually just take it and spread it out myself, and just kind of move it around to where I want it. So I just have a little bit kind of going over the top. As you can see, that's the desired effect that I really wanted. I didn't want this to be this really isn't the main part of the fly. We tied in the structure of the fly, which is the bucktail. And we really don't want this flash to be the majority of this fly. So we just have enough to accent it and to supplement that bucktail, but not too much. And so now that we have it tied in how we want, we're going to take our thread up and clean the front of this fly up. Make sure we have a nice clean head on this fly, and then we're going to whip finish and go ahead and get our thread out of the equation. I'm going to hand turn whip finish. You can use a whip finish tool, whichever works for you, as long as you tie your fly off. I'm going to do two 4-turn whip finishes. I like to whip finish a couple times. I like durable flies. I'd rather spend more time fishing and less time tying. And so after I do that, you can either take a super glue or a head cement or a UV resin. I'm going to use UV resin in this case, and just secure all your thread up at the front. Again, all we're doing is just building durability into this fly. And so by putting in resin, by putting in super glue, by putting in, head cement, any of those, all we're doing is we're just building in durability into the fly, so we don't have to be sitting around retying flies after we catch fish on them. And I like a pretty substantial thread head, or not thread head, resin up in the front, just to make sure that it's nice and durable. And then hit this with the UV light. This is the bone dry resin, so it cures pretty quickly. Don't need to hit it with the UV light for too long. And there we go. So now that all the actual tying is done for this fly, we're going to trim this flash. So we take this flash, we just kind of tied it in. It's just hanging off, all the way back here, way longer. I like to leave it just a touch longer than the actual bucktail itself. So I'm going to cut it back here just a touch longer than the actual bucktail. I like it kind of kicking around. I think that's kind of a trigger for predatory fish. But you know, you can cut it square and flush to where the end of the bucktail is, or you can even leave it, you know, just a touch longer than I like to leave it. That's totally up to you. You know, as I said, this pattern kind of allows for a lot of just personal variation. You know, you can really play with the colors, play with the flash, play with the weighting. You know, use some different hooks. You can really kind of take this pattern and make it your own, and it'll still be effective. So that's Clouser Minnow. If you have any questions in terms of materials or need some help acquiring materials, if you're in the Birmingham area, you know, stop on by. We've got all these materials in stock for what you need. If you're not in the Birmingham area, just leave a comment, or you know, I'll put a materials list in the description, and that'll be about it. Thanks for tuning in.